it's still the best version. I just want to get that out of the way right now. That all I'm about to say amounts to nothing more than dumb, silly nitpicks, and that on a more objective outlook, this is still the best version of the game. Whether you've never played Twilight Princess before or thought about replaying it, then the Wii U version is the logical and most ideal way to play it. Okay? Twilight Princess currently stands as my favorite game of all time. Not that it's realistic to even pick a favorite, but if I had to give it to one game, it would probably be Twilight Princess. There are 3 versions of this game, all of them more or less the same experience, while also being very distinct among one another. The 2016 remaster Twilight Princess HD is often regarded as the best way to experience this game, and I will agree with that notion. With that said, it personally isn't my favorite way to play the game. To put it all into perspective, Twilight Princess was the first Zelda game I experienced. I played it on a GameCube, and after seeing Wind Waker get an HD makeover in 2013, I impatiently waited for Twilight Princess to get similar treatment. It got further painful when a shockingly high-quality render of Twilight Princess Link was making the rounds, causing speculation of how big the graphical overhaul would be, not to mention the Zelda Wii U tech demo mostly using Twilight Princess aesthetics. Finally, Twilight Princess HD was revealed to mostly ambivalence, as most people felt there was hardly a graphical upgrade to the game. Either way, it came out, I went to the midnight release at GameStop, which was pretty cool, and felt the remaster was a sizable improvement over the GameCube original. Years go by, and my feelings towards the quality of this remaster began to dwindle. Some gamers, like John Cartwright, would bring special attention to how involved the graphical update really was in the remaster. The perception of Twilight Princess as a whole seems to shift, with some like me seeing it as the most polished and pinnacle of the classic Zelda formula, and others still hold on to the notion that this game is nothing more than an Ocarina of Time clone. But that's neither here nor there. What I'm trying to get at is that as the years went on, replaying the game on both Wii U and GameCube, after making an hour-and-a-half long video about it, I can comfortably make the stance that I don't like Twilight Princess on Wii U, and prefer to experience the game in its original GameCube format. For the sake of making editing easier, for the sake of more concise comparisons, I'll proceed with my points categorically, starting with the good. If there's one thing to the HD version that is an objective improvement no matter what, it's the new gyro controls. If you're still someone with the belief that motion controls are bad and that they don't improve the playing experience and are best left in the old days of the Wii, then fuck you. Despite precision aiming never being totally required to beat the game, the simple addition of gyro makes aiming immediately more fun and engaging. The river minigame automatically becomes more thrilling with the simple addition of gyro. To be free of the limitations of the analog stick and aiming to be boundaryless within my control never ceases to feel amazing. With all the improvements this remaster does make, gyro motion controls is without a doubt my favorite addition. The Wii version may have its infrared cursor aiming controls, but I'd be lying if I said it felt that good. The gyro on Wii U feels much better, and it's the one thing that entices me to play that version. The Wii version of Twilight Princess is without a doubt the most played version of the game, which makes it all the more unfortunate that it's lacking full 3D camera control. To be fair, it's not like the game needs it. Ocarina of Time established that a good recenter button that shifts the camera behind the character model is really all you need, and Twilight Princess is perfectly playable that way. With that said though, that extra bit of control in the GameCube version is a strong argument in its favor. For players of the Wii version, now having that extra camera control in the Wii U version is inarguably an upgrade. As a player of the GameCube version, I can't help but feel the camera controls have gotten much worse. It's functional, don't get me wrong, but it feels like it's fighting with me, and there's a noticeable input lag when moving the camera. Moving the stick to move the camera around has this resistance to it that makes it not good to control. I think it's because they added this mechanic of having the camera remain still once it's moved. Because moving the camera also steers Link as well, when you're moving the camera while moving, you feel this tug of war going on between the camera controls and player controls. Breath of the Wild would have the same mechanic, and it's nice because it allows me to frame the camera for some nice looking shots just for the hell of it. But in Breath of the Wild, the camera still controls perfectly without fighting me, while in Twilight Princess HD, it's ass trash. The Y-axis on GameCube also felt more comprehensible. On GameCube, playing with the C-stick makes it clear that for the Y-axis, There's a zoomed in angle and a zoomed out angle. You don't really have much more control than that. While limiting, it still felt very polished and allowed for getting some really awesome wide angles when riding Epona in Hyrule Field. The Wii U version technically also allows that, and to be honest, I do prefer the framing in the Wii U version opposed to the more overhead look of the GameCube version. But because the camera still fights with me when I'm trying to move it, it just feels bad. And as a bonus, I don't think this version of the game was really programmed to have the camera zoom out, because Epona's shadow keeps disappearing, which... come on. Am I an asshole for expecting a little more polish than this? Speaking of Epona. So for a series with iconic imagery like Link riding a horse, it's surprising the horse gameplay within Zelda games never really amounts to nothing more than a faster means of transportation. Twilight Princess is really the only Zelda game that did anything remotely interesting with the on-horse sword combat, and flexibility like being able to perform quick mounts and dismounts on Epona. The Wii U version isn't that different in that regard, with the only small change being the controls suck ass. Okay, it's not that bad, but compared to how it was before, it's so needlessly heavy now. I get what they were going for. They wanted Epona to steer more stiffly because it lines closer to how horse controls felt in Ocarina of Time and how they would feel in Breath of the Wild. In that regard, it does look a little weird to see Epona jolt left and right in the original, but it allowed Epona to feel much more responsive. Steering her in OG Twilight Princess is a breeze, and the changes they made to make her feel stiffer ultimately feels like a handicap in those moments of intense horse combat, as well as traversal. It's not like Epona can't be as flexible as the original, but you gotta move the stick an uncomfortably large amount to get her to move her ass. Whereas she feels much more responsive in the original, which I feel is complemented by the octagonal gate, which assists in steering her further. I won't lie and say this change ruins the game or anything, and I do understand the creative decisions on why the change was made, but in execution, I think it's an inferior control compared to the original. If only it stopped there. Okay, this is where explaining controls becomes even more challenging, but I can't help but feel the base controls, simply moving Link around, feels worse. Link in the original had a prominent amount of weight to his movement and steering that felt very natural and good to control. You know when you rotate the stick and you can see as well as feel how much the character is willing to turn? It's that kind of control that helps give a character weight, and here it feels good. The Wii U version seemingly removes all of that weight, making Link feel a lot more snappy. You can see I can rotate the stick like crazy and Link will spin around like an idiot. This snappiness can also be felt when playing normally and sort of causes a subtle jitter to the camera, which is kind of distracting for me. I can see most people preferring the Wii U controls because it is technically more flexible. Personally, I like the more weighty feel of the original, and while it's completely subjective, I do think the slight input lag in the Wii U version is an objective downgrade. I can't be the only one who feels it. It's admittedly hard to notice, but pressing the button to do rolls definitely has a more laggy feel in the Wii U version, which also applies to every other action. I also read how Aonuma was pretty proud of the changes made to the swimming controls. I honestly didn't notice for the longest time, but doing direct comparisons, yeah, I guess turning while swimming has a little more weight to it, which feels a tad more natural, so cool. I also noticed that you can coast on the surface of the water with the Zora armor, which you can't do as easily in the original. Really, I only bring this up because Aonuma made such a big deal out of it when it hardly changes anything in my opinion. I never had issues with the swimming controls in the original, so yeah. They also doubled the climbing speed in the HD version. This was one of those, oh thank God changes because of how slow the climbing felt in the original. But in retrospect, it really was never that bad to begin with. You really don't even climb that often in the game, and once you get the claw shot, you can basically skip most climbing segments. It is still an upgrade, I won't try to say otherwise, but upon reflection, it's not like it saves the game or anything. Overall, these changes are so small that only a sad recluse nerd like me would notice, so don't take these observations too seriously. I'll be the first to say that I don't play the Wii version. Hell, I've never even finished it. But with that said, I feel this remaster could have done better justice to the game's largest player base. Keeping the mirrored version of the game locked behind a harder difficulty is pretty lame. Players of the Wii version shouldn't be forced to play a harder mode just to keep the proportions familiar. I think both the harder hero mode and a mirrored mode could have and should have been separate toggles. But not only that, the missing mechanics of the Wii version, like the cursor aiming controls and sword motion controls, are unfortunately absent. That's not to say I was ever a fan of them to begin with. I feel the cursor controls in the Wii version felt quite sluggish and not too precise. All we get in the HD version is a third-person camera angle for aiming, which is fine, but I would have liked to see the actual cursor controls left intact and maybe even improved upon. The motion sword combat really isn't better than the traditional controls, but what would have been so wrong with at least having an option? Again, I don't play the Wii version, but I respect that most Twilight Princess players come from that version, so I feel they should have been done better justice by keeping those unique mechanics intact. This is probably my smallest nitpick, but damn it if it still doesn't bother the crap out of me. So in the original, during loading sequences, the music lowers in volume a bit, but is still plenty audible. You know, it's to let you know you're in a loading screen and it comes off as very polished. In the HD version, the music completely cuts out during loading sequences. Am I the only one who finds that distracting? Like, I'm trying to enjoy the music, but having it keep cutting out takes me out of it, and only makes traveling through Hyrule more obnoxious. Still, being able to hear the music in the original helped distracts at just how many loading zones there are in Hyrule. But it's only so much more noticeable now when the music completely fades out. It also hinders the game's dynamic soundtrack. It's so cool how in Castletown, you can hear the different arrangements fade in and out in real time, and it's awesome. In the HD version, it's like, whatever, because the whole track goes mute, so that transition isn't as cool anymore. Fucking trash, man. This version sucks. Okay, I understand this is going to be a pretty hot take, so I'll try to be as respectful as I can. When it comes to older 3D games of much simpler geometry, I'm kind of ambivalent on the improvements updated textures bring, either because I don't think the new textures respect the original art style as much as they should, or because I feel the new textures clash too much with the simple geometry. For Twilight Princess HD, the new updated textures are more noticeable than what most people would think. In many cases, the new textures really can improve the visuals of the game. I don't want to undersell how effective textures alone can be to improve the visuals, but in many cases in Twilight Princess HD, I feel the extremely detailed high-res textures slapped on a flat model only accentuates the dated visuals. Watch any review of Twilight Princess HD and they'll sure to bring up how dated the graphics look. But try to think about how the game was originally played, in the original resolution of 480 and most likely played on a CRT. The lower res and softer look helped create an illusion of more detail. By having more detailed textures to begin with, the illusion breaks. Hair especially is less flattering in the HD version. You can say this is a native issue with the game itself relying too much on models for the hair detail, but my point is that if you're gonna update the textures, it would be wise to update the models too if the visual demands for it. For older games like this, it's a divisive battle over ideal visual preferences. I feel Twilight Princess HD mostly does a great job paying respect to what the original textures are going for, which is highly commendable, but I don't know, to me, I can't help but still prefer how the original looks, like the paths on Hyrule Field. They feel more natural and seamless in the original, sorta reminds me of those walking trails you find on grass without sidewalks. In the HD version, it's similar, but the paths jut out a bit. The sand is more detailed, but comes off as more flat, and oh my god, Epona, what did they do to you? I see what they were doing. Upon closer inspection, there is more detail, which is nice, but the shading and lower res of the original sold an illusion of more detail. The more pure white texture doesn't integrate well with the model and looks much worse in my honest opinion. There needs to be a balance of resolution to texture detail and model detail. The enhanced resolution and textures really don't do this game many favors. Look at how it butchers Ilya. The model is the same, but the lower res and frankly better lighting hides the imperfections, and the older, softer textures come off as more visually attractive. Honestly, I'm starting to find a new appreciation for less detailed, more vague textures, at least for older games. Like, if I were to see these textures in a texture file dump or something, yeah, I probably wouldn't be able to tell what they were supposed to represent. But in-game, with the lower resolution obscuring more detail, my mind fills in the blanks and I can see what it's all supposed to be. In the HD version, it's more clear to be sure, but there's something about having all that detail front and center that sort of takes away the magic a bit for me. It makes things like repeat tile textures more noticeable and distracting. It clashes with older model assets, and overall looks flat and uninteresting when put on admittedly simple geometry. CRT-like visuals for retro games are becoming the new favorite because what you don't see is just as important as what you do see. In the end, it's all a matter of taste, and I totally understand those who feel the HD version is an upgrade visually. I personally feel it doesn't do the game any favors and only makes the visual shortcomings more prominent and harder to ignore. I feel the original visuals with the original resolution provides a more organic look that the original artwork is going for. I guess I simply prefer a more consistent balance between texture detail and model detail. Twilight Princess HD, in my opinion, could have done better by either cutting back on the extreme texture detail or updating models to complement that detail more. Probably the biggest addition made for this game was the additional functionality of the Wii U Gamepad. It's the usual inclusions you'd expect, like having a real-time map and real-time item inventory. I'm not going to say these additions negatively affect the game inherently. There's a new button to transform into a wolf more quickly, which is nice, but I fail to see why it's a Gamepad exclusive. The minus button on the Pro controller does jack shit, so why couldn't it also be a quick transform button? My main issue with the Gamepad boils down to one simple question. What the hell happened to the item wheel? Most traditional Zelda games have the items laid out in a grid within the pause menu, which works just fine, but can make scrolling through it in the late game tedious because you have to go through more items to get to the one you want. In Twilight Princess, they gave the items its own sub-menu, with the items laid out in a wheel. Then they added a snap feature that allows you to quickly select the item you want. This was awesome, as it made item management much faster than any 3D Zelda game before, even though you only have 2 item buttons in the GameCube version. In the Wii version, it's even more crazy. There's technically only 1 button to use an item, but there's 3 more item hotkeys you can assign. From a certain perspective, you can see the game now having 4 item buttons, which kicks ass. So where the fuck is it in the Wii U version? For whatever reason, they decided to bring back the grid, which, I'm sorry, but it sucks. Oh yeah, sure, you can now swap items in real time, cool, but really, does it actually save you time to have to look down at the gamepad, use your finger to move an item to a button, and then exit? There's a 3rd item button which helps, but I swear to Christ, the total amount of time spent dicking around in the item menu is much longer in the Wii U version, despite the convenience of real-time management. The closest I got was pausing the game and highlighting an item to then map it to a button. But bear in mind, you're holding the heavy-ass gamepad with one hand, so even if it was fast in its own right, it's still not comfortable or fun to do. And why the fuck do I have to look at the gamepad to begin with? It's not like a DS or 3DS where both screens are within your peripheral vision. Having to look down takes me away from the game, and over the course of the adventure, it just gets cumbersome. So I can't even avoid it in Simu if I want to use the gyro controls and ignore the other gamepad functions. If you're someone who prefers the Pro controller, and who could blame you as it's much more comfortable, then you're stuck with the grid. The item wheel is gone. Come on, man, am I the only one who appreciated it? The way it would swoop up or down depending on what D-pad button you pressed, how it doesn't obscure the rest of the game. The HD version completely dwarfs the entire screen and just pops up like an annoying advertisement. This sucks, man, I'm sorry. I cannot see this as an improvement to the experience, even if it seems like it on paper. Okay, you've probably seen this coming, but fuck these stamps, man. Yeah, it was cool when Miiverse was a thing, but come on, all they serve now is another bullshit collectible that, I'm sorry, I don't care about. What makes it worse is that these stamps accentuate an extreme hot take I have. Okay, so in the Wii U version, they've changed some things with the rupees. The first thing is that they've gotten rid of the pop-up message that used to appear every time you booted the game up and got a rupee. That was, understandably, a little annoying, and having it gone is a good thing. Thumbs up from me. The other thing that they did was increase the wallet sizes. Again, all good in my book, but I do have to question the usefulness of having such large rupee amounts other than making the game easier by letting you use the magic armor longer. The last thing they did was remove the return of rupees in chests when you didn't have enough room in your wallet. And I'm sorry, I have to say it, but fuck you, I like that feature. It keeps the chest valuable so I can come back later when I do have room. Let's dive into the real issue here. The problem was really not having a lot of space in the wallet to begin with. That's already fixed with the increased wallet sizes. I can't tell you the amount of times I've opened a chest, maybe in a dungeon looking for keys or heart pieces in the overworld, with a near full wallet, to then get a large sum of rupees that ultimately becomes worthless because I only claim a small amount of them. I wouldn't care too much because there's plenty of chests in the game, but wait, now half of them are filled with fucking stamps. Maybe they could have made the stamps another collectible you could sell, like the golden bugs. This quality of life change only comes off as pointless and more hindrance in my opinion. Despite all that I've ranted on about in this video, I would still say Twilight Princess HD is the version to play for newcomers and returning old players. Most of my points amounts to the dumbest of personal nitpicks that I'm expecting most people to disagree with. With that said, I ultimately feel this re-release really didn't fix anything that was inherently wrong in the original. The light vessel quest everyone hates wasn't made any better just because they removed a couple of bugs. You still had to comb all the space the game was asking for, so I doubt much time was actually saved. The visuals really don't seem improved at all to me. Really, the updated textures only seemed necessary because the game is in HD now. A step Nintendo might not see as necessary anymore for a basic re-release given how Pikmin turned out, and an execution only made the rest of the game look more dated as a result. I think it would take a more ambitious effort to improve the visuals of the game. If a new Twilight Princess release had the same visual effort put in as Metroid Prime Remastered, maybe looking like that Smash Ultimate stage, then I could be happy with it. Slapping new textures can only do so much to me, but I recognize for most people, it's a lot better. Same goes for the Gamepad features. I'll understand for the majority, it's all improvements and only my nitpicky ass would ever have a problem with it. Despite all that, it's still the same Twilight Princess experience I love, just not the end-all be-all ideal experience. Even so, it's unfortunately not easy to get Twilight Princess HD anymore. Assuming you'd still be willing to drop $60 on it, you can't access the Wii U eShop anymore. Don't even bother looking up used copies as they get pricier every day. Simu would be great, but the gamepad functionality would be tricky. Honestly, if you want to play Twilight Princess, just boot up Dolphin and play either the GameCube or Wii version. Ultimately, I feel the HD version spent too much effort fixing what was never broken. We're in an interesting spot of how Nintendo approaches GameCube re-releases, and I can only hope the next attempt really gives Twilight Princess the love and care I feel the game deserves. Metroid Prime Remastered showed us just how much of a drastic improvement in graphics can come from better models and lighting. Nintendo continues to blue ball us with fucking Pixar quality models of Link and Ganondorf they waste away for advertising purposes. If these kinds of updated visuals can come from a new remake of this game, then I'd probably foam at the mouth. Might as well if Aonuma doesn't want to make new games with the traditional linear style, so they could at least remake all the older ones with overhauled visuals for the ideal modern experience. I want to thank those who tolerated my ranting, rambling ass up to this point. I don't plan on doing more rant-style videos anytime soon, but this one was one I just had to get off my chest. I think that will be all for me today, so I just want to say thank you for watching.